From Alcatraz Prison to the terrible detention camps in North Korea, here are the prisons from which no inmate can escape. In the United States, in San Francisco Bay, is one of the most legendary prisons ever built. The Federal Prison of Alcatraz, built on an island of 9 hectares. Originally built in 1850 as a fortress to protect the bay, over the years American engineers fortified it with a citadel and high walls. But in the early 20th century, Alcatraz gradually became a military prison before being administered by the Federal Bureau of Prisons in 1933. That same year, Alcatraz began to house civilian prisoners. The government, concerned about the rising number of murders, wanted the prison to embody the fight against crime. From that time on, Alcatraz became a unique prison, as much for the location and management as for the myth and prestige that surrounded it. Indeed, Alcatraz was so fascinating that criminals even wanted to be incarcerated there to complete their reputation as outlaws, no matter how absurd. Yet everything was hostile in this prison, surrounded by dangerous waters and strong currents, and when a prisoner was imprisoned there, he was subjected to very painful psychological treatments. He was stripped of his name and called only by his serial number. The prisoner was subjected to demanding routine and total discipline. There was even a rule forbidding the prisoner to speak out loud, to read magazines that might inform him of events in the outside world. Although the conditions of detention were terrible in the early days, they became more relaxed over the years. The inmates were generally not happy to be there. Big names of criminality stayed there, such as Al Capone and George R. Kelly, and they were not a little proud to live the same fate as the criminal elite. However, if they wanted to escape, they were always faced with insurmountable obstacles. The most daring ones pushed their escape attempt to the limit, but all failed. When they succeeded in deceiving the guards, they still had to cross the bay, fight against the currents, and avoid white sharks. The only ones who managed to escape in 1962, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, used a raft, and no one ever found them, and it is likely that they drowned. Today, there are no more inmates in Alcatraz Prison, which was permanently closed in 1963 due to high maintenance costs. Let's go to China, to Beijing, and more precisely to the Changpeng district, to have a closer look at Keychain Prison, built in 1958. With the help of the USSR, this penitentiary has mainly housed war criminals and political prisoners. When prisoners first arrive in this prison, the quality of their stay depends on their social rank and the seriousness of their offenses. A high-ranking prisoner would expect more comfortable living conditions and access to more leisure activities, but a low-ranking prisoner could not. The lower-ranking prisoner has few rights. They are no longer called by name, but by numbers. He lives in a narrow cell and cannot see the buildings or the yard through his window. He is woken up at 7 o'clock with whistles and has to go to bed at 9 o'clock with the same whistles. And during the night, the lights are left on so that the guard can see him. In addition, prisoners are forced to keep their hands off the sheets while sleeping. During the day, detainees do not have a wide choice of occupations. They are allowed to exercise or walk, but only under the condition that they do not come into contact with other prisoners. They are allowed a half-hour shower per week or per month under the supervision of an officer. They can sometimes do manual work, but they are not allowed to use the library, which is reserved for high-ranking prisoners, nor are they allowed to eat the same meals as the latter. They have to make do with cereals, soups, and salted vegetables, unlike the others who can try meat or fish. On the bright side, they can receive visits in a special room divided into 2 sections. Communication between the visitors and the inmate is through a glass window. Although these visits are always in the presence of guards and do not take place often, they are still a consolation. An additional consolation is that these prisoners are alive and well. Indeed, all these political prisoners could have been executed if the order of Mao Zedong, given in 1957, had not been respected. Mao had said in essence that the execution of prisoners had far more disadvantages than advantages for society. But if they are kept alive, they are no less badly treated, as Y. Jianxing reports in a denunciatory book. Indeed, it is reported that during the Cultural Revolution, many abuses were practiced on the prisoners: psychological abuse, physical torture, extreme punishment, and food deprivation. Finally, the Keychain Prison is so safe and well guarded that no case of escape has been reported, and the political prisoners left to their fate with no hope of salvation have only 2 choices: die or resist in silence. The Tadmor Prison in Palmyra, of which only ruins remain, was located in Syria and is called the Kingdom of Death and Madness by a Syrian poet who was imprisoned there. It was a hellish prison where the only possible form of escape was death. Built in the middle of the desert in 1930 by the French, the Tadmor Prison was, by 1971 and 2000, the nightmare of all political dissidents of the former Syrian president Hafez al-Assad. In 2015, the Islamic State seized it and blew up all the buildings. Tadmor Prison was described as the worst place in the country, where the luckiest prisoner did not go completely mad. Outside its walls, activists affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood and opposed to the regime of the current president, causing social unrest and becoming increasingly popular. When the law enforcement officers seized the activists, they were treated worse than death. They were taken to Tadmor Prison, and as a welcome party, the torturers inflicted atrocious torments on them. The prisoners lived in perpetual anguish, crammed into dark and unsanitary dormitories, eating almost nothing, receiving no visitors. But this was only part of the mortification they endured. The guards would randomly seize and torture several prisoners every day. The prisoners were not allowed to look the jailers in the eyes, which they could tell by the color of their boots. They were also not allowed to look through the dormitory window. To escape was to expose themselves to the worst punishment imaginable. Moreover, they were perpetually humiliated. Blessed were those who were patient enough. Those who survived this extreme experience have given their world their testimony, either through stories or through poems, and the memories they have recounted are blood-curdling. Tadmor Prison was the symbol of their slavery, and for them, the whole of humanity had to be enlightened about what was happening within these cement walls. But this symbol was destroyed in 2015 by the members of the Islamic State, who took care to first photograph these places unknown even to NGOs. Yassan Haj Salah, who was imprisoned there for some time, said that the destruction of the prison was a blow to the freedom of all those who suffered there. The worst event that took place in this prison was undoubtedly the massacre of June 27, 1980, after the insurrection of the Muslim Brotherhood and an aborted assassination attempt of the Syrian president. The Syrian armed forces decided to take revenge and shot in retaliation thousands of prisoners linked to the rebel movement in their dormitories. This was the bloodiest episode that the Tadmor Prison has known. Today, only ruins, gloomy photographs, and distressing memories remain. There are many horrible prisons from which it is impossible to escape, but there are few like the detention camps in North Korea. One of the most totalitarian regimes in the world has to have the most horrific and secure prisons. The Keychain Detention Center covers an area of 155 square kilometers, isolated from everything. If you are suspected of being opposed to the regime, you are imprisoned for life. All you can wish for in this abominable place is to not die a slow death caused by malnutrition and disease. From dawn until midnight, you have to perform arduous and perilous tasks in the mines, with obsolete instruments and without the possibility of rest. And you are hardly fed with small amounts of forage. You become very thin, very weak, and are reduced to eating snakes and rats for a little vitamin. In short, there is no humanitarian situation more calamitous than in this place. The worst thing you can do is to escape or to trust a guard who wants to help you escape. You might be tempted to believe that you have earned the pity of the guards and that they want to save your life in a fit of generosity. They pretend not to see you as you run to the fence and you imagine that freedom is near, but it is not. It's a horrible trap. The guards take pleasure in shooting you as you try to escape. Not only have they learned to do this with pleasure because of the brainwashing they have undergone, but they are rewarded for their murders with university admissions. Indeed, when they succeed in shooting prisoners who try to escape, they were rewarded with university admissions. Can one imagine anything more cynical and barbaric? Finally, the slave camp continues to receive political prisoners who become slaves. There are now between 150,000 and 200,000 of them throughout the country. The city of Soledetsk, Russia, is known as home of one of the most hostile and secure prisons in the world. There, in an arid climate on the border with Kazakhstan, is an old penitentiary known as the Black Dolphin. The worst murderers in Russia are locked up there. Serial killers, cannibals, rapists, pedophiles, terrorists, and child molesters. All these criminals are deprived of everything and closely guarded in this prison, whose existence dates back to at least 1745. When a criminal arrives for the first time, the prison officers already take away any hope of escape by blindfolding him, so he doesn't even know the general appearance of the place. Later, when the prisoner realizes that the chances of escape are zero, he has only one desire left, and that is not to turn into an animal, because nothing is human in this dark establishment. Since 2000, all prisoners of the Black Dolphin are there for the rest of their lives. The inmates are isolated in padlocked cells and are allowed 1.5 hours of daily exercise in a cage. Prison officers make a round and monitor them, making sure they are compliant. If the inmates are to be transferred from one building to another, they are handcuffed and forced to bend over so they cannot see beyond their feet. In this prison for the criminals, there is not much profit to be made from good behavior. The severity of the warders forces them to submit, and to every order they receive, they are obliged to answer, "Yes, sir." The only favorable treatment they can receive is 4 meals a day, consisting of soup and bread. The maximum security of this prison is justified by the number of ferocious criminals in there, who have committed crimes of severity you will find hard to imagine. In 2017, there were about 700 inmates, and they alone killed more than 4,000 people. One of the inmates, Igor Tichenko, who was imprisoned for being involved in a shooting in Moscow, told Russia Today that he would have rather died from gunfire than to go through this prison experience. Finally, it is in this prison that all these murderers will end their lives, with no possibility of release or escape. This is the end of this video, where you've discovered some of the most secure prisons in the world. Which one made the strongest impression on you? Tell us in the comments.